Hello, Joe. Good old Joe Biden. Most millennials and Zoomers probably know Joe Biden as the vice president under Obama's administration, and that's probably for a good reason. He likes to remind you of it. It's basically the only thing he's ever done as a politician, if you listen to him on a regular basis. Good old Joe. Joe Biden. Most millennials and Zoomers probably know Joe Biden as the vice president under Obama's administration, and that's for good reason. He likes to remind you of it constantly, but Joe Biden has had a long and sordid history as a politician. You may remember him as the one who thought that two drinking fountains just mean shorter lines for everybody. Yes, the segregationist. There's a lot of things that Joe Biden has done in his past that is probably pretty egregious, but most recently, we probably know him mostly for his gaffes, his ability to scratch and sniff, not knowing really, I'd say, what would be social conventions or boundaries or the meaning of the word consent when it comes to individuals. And it seems like there's just a never-ending pattern of Joe Biden moments in which we're kind of like, what exactly is going on? Now, some people have said that it's considered ageist or perhaps even defamatory to say things like he's too senile to run for president or that he is not completely with it, shall we say. But it seems like there's a never-ending pattern of events that make me wonder why exactly he's running for president in the first place. Now let's turn to the most recent event, the one that's kind of getting all the press coverage right now, and that is the smelling of the fingers.
President of the United States. You call your kids in from the other room because you want them to hear what the President of the United States.
Now, this one's not as strange as everyone's making it out to be. It's not too unusual to kiss the fingers of your lover. Let's just rewind it in slow motion here so everyone can get a taste of it.
One may cut to the President of the United States.
Yeah, in the scheme of things, it's not that unusual. Although, I mean, in the pattern of Joe Biden isms, should we just call them Bidisms? Yeah, in Joe Bidisms, it's, obviously a little bit unusual. It's basically if we had a, let's say, a tapestry, or we were making some kind of a Technicolor dream. Let's say if we had a tapestry, or we were making a Technicolor dream coat, this would be yet one more patch in which you're like, this is making a very bizarre image, and by the end of it, Joseph is turning out to be somewhat of a sexual predator. Now, Joe Biden has a long and sordid history when it comes to both his involvement in the segregation movement and basically his apologia when it comes to billionaires.
First, I think we have to do is we have to deal with income inequity. I love Bernie, but I'm not Bernie Sanders. I don't think 500 billionaires are the reason why we're in trouble. I hope my grandkids grow up to don't listen to their parents who all decided to do something, run the World Food Program, another one be Attorney General, another one run a social organization for at-risk youth,
Again, not a sentence, and he struggles with that quite a bit, and it should be alarm bells in a lot of ways, but at the end of the day, whether it's his eye exploding,
going to be blown away is overwhelming. And so we have to, be in a position where when we build back, we don't build back to normal, we build back to what is necessary. And so there's a whole range of things that are going on now in terms of,
or of course those diatribes that just seem ripped right out of a Simpsons episode.
I learned that it makes a difference. This was the diving board area, and I was one of the guards, and there weren't allowed to, there was a 3-meter board. And if you fell off sideways, you landed on the darn cement over there. And Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys. And I did. And back in those days, to show how things have changed, one of the things you had to use, if you used pomade in your hair, you had to wear a bathing cap. And so he was up on the board, wouldn't listen to me. I said, "Hey, Esther, you, off the board, or I'll come up and drag you off." Well, he came off, and he said, "I'll meet you outside." My car, this was mostly,
Or, of course, there's his comments where he basically has to cover up his power levels.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it, but think how we think about it.
Yeah, of course. No. Great save, Joe. We're doing great. And of course, I mean, at the end of the day, it still baffles me how individuals want to become president at that age. I don't think if I was pushing 80, let alone if I was pushing, say, 40, I would be interested in being the president of the United States. Probably the most scrutinized position in human history in terms of the world stage, in terms of the eyes of the world constantly watching you. Do you want to have that at that age? Apparently some people do. I don't know whether it's a combination of simply duty, they feel they're duty bound to do so, or whether or not it's just narcissism or the quest for power. Everyone is a kingmaker. But it's not the first time that Joe Biden has run for president. Joe Biden has a history of running for president, and unsuccessfully so far.
Gentlemen and ladies of the Senate.
One chapter receiving fresh scrutiny comes from his earliest years in the Senate, when he strongly opposed mandatory school busing. It was designed to achieve integration and a more equitable education. It was the mid-1970s. Biden favored desegregation, but not through busing. What's less known is how he followed the lead of some of the Senate's most fervent segregationists. In a series of never-before-published letters reviewed by CNN, the strength of Biden's opposition to busing comes into sharper focus. On March 25, 1977, Biden wrote, "My bill strikes at the heart of the injustice of court-ordered busing. It prohibits the federal courts from disrupting our educational system." Biden sought and received support from Mississippi Senator James Eastland, the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and a leading symbol of Southern resistance to desegregation. He frequently spoke of blacks as, quote, an inferior race. Biden reflected on that era earlier this year.
They're a bunch of racists. There was, James O. Eastland, Mississippi, Strom Thurmond, and so on. There were 9 guys who were in the caucus that were, I ran against in the civil rights movement.
And even worse, though, happens to be during the testimony of Anita Hill, in which Joe Biden grilled her and probably made some of the worst questions in that entire period.
Again, it's difficult, but for the record, what substance did he bring up in this instance at EEOC in his office? What was the content of what he said?
Well, this was a reference to an individual who had a very large penis, and he used the name that he had been referred to in the pornographic material.
Do you recall what it was?
Yes, I do. The name that was referred to was Long Dong Silver.
Good job, Joe. I mean, yes, Joe Biden has subsequently apologized for his involvement in the Anita Hill hearings. And even then, she has personally not accepted his apology, and he's tried to just move. He basically apologized in pursuit of his presidential candidacy, which is always, of course, a genuine time to do any of this. And, of course, all these events, they could be isolated. All these events are both a combination of strange and bizarre. And, of course, they're perfect material for the media. They're perfect material both for both sides, whether or not it's the right-wing conservative media or even the left-wing media, to look at this and be like, well, that's kind of strange, right? This is just yet another funny little gaffe by Joe. Good old Joe. We're not entirely sure what he's doing. Even the ones, though, that are supposed to be relatively benign, like the old Corn Pop Joe segment that I was showing you guys earlier, when you look at the entirety of that segment, it paints a very different picture, and one that should be a little bit more troubling the more and more we look into Joe Biden.
And he looked at Larkin and he said, "You mind if he represents you?" And I'll never forget what he said. I learned a lot. He said, and I mean it sincerely. He looked at me and he said, "One hunky's just as bad as any other. I'll take whoever you send me." And here's what I want to tell you about Earl. Here's what I want to tell you about the neighborhood and the heart. I defended him. He got beat up right on the other side of the field here. He walking along the tracks. He was a sailor in a sailor's uniform, the guy who he beat up and robbed. And so I thought he was innocent. I kept the jury out 5 hours, but they convicted him. And I felt so bad. So I go down to the old prison all the time. They had little wooden tables and two little chairs in a big dome you'd sit under.
I needed a new heel for my shoe. So I decided to go to Morganville, which is what they call Shelbyville in those days. So I tied an onion to my belt, which was the style at the time.
But it does get a little bit strange here. and a little bit more unusual. And yes, all of these can be chalked up to being isolated incidents. There's the hair smelling, and the shoulder rubbing, and the shoulder smelling, and then the smelling of the shoulders, and then the smelling of the hair, combined with the licking of the fingers, the exploding eyeballs, all these kind of things. They're just a series of strange events. But they still do paint an unusual picture of the frontrunner for the presidential candidacy.
And by the way, you know, I sit on the stand, and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap. And I tell you what, the men, they're now all men, the guys I work with down here, and they're all guys at the time, they're all good men. Most of them made an awful lot of themselves. And Earl Larkin had a rough time. And some of you knew Earl.
Give me 5 P's for a quarter, you'd say.
And this is obviously under public scrutiny. This is obviously something that people are looking at constantly and dissecting. And there's really, it's hard to keep defending these unusual moments and instances. But what can be said is that beyond all the strange, and there is a lot of strange, is that there isn't a lot of substance. Joe Biden has been in the forefront of the media, both for being obviously the number one candidate for the Democratic presidential election, but he hasn't really been putting forward a lot of ideas. We talk constantly about how strange all these events are, the exploding eyes, the teeth running away from his body, just the decaying mass that is Joe Biden at this moment. But we don't really talk about what Joe Biden is offering and his defense of billionaires and his basically status quo across the board. But we should be allowing people like Bernie Sanders and even Elizabeth Warren, who are frankly polling a lot higher nationally and have a much better chance of defeating Donald Trump and ending the strange circus that we have in terms of so many different candidates coming forward, many of whom have no chance of ever being electable.
From now on, the baby sleeps in the crib. Iron helps us play. Hello, Joe.
Did you enjoy what you just watched and now crave more nectar of the damned? Did you know that if you're watching on YouTube, you're only getting half the surfy experience? We upload all of our content commercial and censorship-free to our Patreon. Due to the general demonetization of our videos, we now upload half of our original content directly to those who can help us produce this show. Want even more nectar than that? Well, come join us at twitch.tv/TheSerfsTV, where we do weekly live streams, debates, interviews, AMAs, and more. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can help support our show 100% free by subscribing to our Twitch channel. So come join us, be merry, and know that your support is helping us do great things.
We would like to thank Miranda Marone for being our Lord and Savior. Please go subscribe to their SoundCloud and help support their art as they're helping support ours. We'd like to thank our lords, Ricky Pilgrim, I'm Raft, Michaelia Schmidt, Molly thinks she's cool. They are the pillars of our organization and helping us complete great things. And now presenting our Knights of the Round Table. Josh Mickelson, Schizosaurus, Dr. Zayas, Dylan Blythe, Paul Parfit, Andre Lynn Epperly, Daniel Kahn, Josh Mickelson, Angela, Jed Lewis, Cooper Pilot, and Todd Lajeunesse.